Hey, it's Brian Burns, and welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, we're going to take a look at marketing today. We had a couple of sessions on sales, but today what we're going to be talking about is how content marketing has changed. Where do you think it's going? How do we utilize it best? And kind of the mistakes that people are making. I've got a great guest on the show, an author, speaker, somebody who lives in this world, Robert Rose. We're going to get deep into it. But before we do, I want to make sure you're aware of nudge.ai. I use it as an artificial intelligence way of managing my account-based marketing and sales efforts to monitor my market, to find out what they care about. And it sends me an email every morning and tells me what they care about, what priority people should be in, and how to reach out to them. So check it out, nudge.ai. I've got a free course on it at my website, b2brevenue.com. All you have to do is enter the coupon code NUDGE, just the word nudge, and make sure it zeroes out as the total, and you can take the course for free. Have your salespeople take it, your marketing people take it. It's all good. Also, if you want to learn about how your customers are making product selections, I've got a free ebook on the website, b2brevenue.com. Just enter your information, and it'll email you a link to the book, not the book, but the link to the book. Click on the link, and it'll download it right there from Box. And also at the end of this, I'll be describing kind of the outcome that I'm getting with demand gen people as far as starting conversations and getting a meeting and coupling your exact target profile into your content strategy as a way of engaging your ideal customer profiles instead of spamming them and just advertising to them or pitching to them. So this is a great new approach that I've been having a tremendous amount of success with. Also, connect up with me on LinkedIn. Let's get Robert on the horn here, and I'll sum it up at the end for you. Hey, Robert, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, thank you for that. First of all, it's great to be here. So thank you for having me on the show. I'm Robert Rose. I am currently Chief Strategy Advisor with the Content Marketing Institute, and then run the consulting business for that organization, which we do through a business called the Content Advisory, which really means my job is running around the planet looking at usually larger, more global brands and helping them operationalize this thing called content marketing. Spend a lot of time in B2B, in technology and financial services companies, and really just helping educate and evangelize the process of content strategy and how it can really be helped to forward a business strategy.
And how'd you get into this?
Oh my! Well, let's see. I've been doing this for about a decade, which really I've got the gray hair to show for it. So there's that I've got going for me. I was the CMO of a software company back in the late '90s, early 2000s, and what happened was we did the typical Silicon Valley 2 rounds of funding, the whole thing, and I went to my board and my CEO and I said, hey, listen, I want to do something different because we were competing with the likes of IBM and Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard, and we were 5 guys in a basement. And I said, I want to do something different with marketing. I want to take this money and we're never going to win the SEO game. We're never going to win the paid media game. We're never going to win the brand game. And so if we're going to win, we're going to need to be deeper than anybody else. So I said, I want to hire communicators, designers, journalists, writers, basically content creators, and I would teach them to be marketing people. And I would basically turn us into a small media company that would position us as the deepest, thought leaderiest, wonderfulest, really just the best thought leader in the space that I possibly could, and rely on that to basically be our competitive advantage over the big boys. And we did that. I basically hired all these wonderful creative content people and trained them on how to do things like SEO and email and direct marketing and advertising and all of that. And it worked. We built the company up to about a little over $10 million in revenue over the course of the next couple of years. And I was out on the speaking circuit, having done this, talking about my story, And I'd read Joe Pulizzi's book, Get Content, Get Customers at the time, and he and I happened to be speaking at a conference, basically saying the exact same thing. Him from the publishing side of the world, and me from the marketing practitioner side of the world. And we just got along famously. We became instant best friends. And he said, "Hey, when you're done with this, this whole CMO thing, we should do some work together." And funny enough, I said, funny you should ask that, because I actually am ready. And so I ended up joining him and CMI, and we wrote a couple of books together, and that the rest, as they say, is history.
And so today it's mostly consulting and authoring. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. My business these days is writing books, speaking, educating, and primarily consulting with larger brands to help them stand up content marketing as an operation in their business.
And you like that better than the CMO role? Was that kind of just a lot of administrative overhead? As I like to call myself, I am the administrative overhead. I will say this: it fits my personality better. Yeah. I am better in ever since I was a kid and I played football as a kid. I was always I'm a much better sprinter than I am marathoner. Yeah. And so I'm really good. My talent, if I have one, is to help provide a roadmap, help to set the strategy, help to build a team, help to set the direction, and then leave. And that is where I'm best used, and it's a better use of my personality and just the way that I operate. So yes, I prefer it to the and I truly admire those who can marathon and build something and really work the long game. Yeah. It's a very different thing.
It's a very different thing, yeah, and it's a special talent.
And how do you see content developing right now? A lot of people feel like we've kind of hit peak content. Are people just doing it wrong, or are they just doing it suboptimally?
Well, there's a little bit of all of that, right? The challenge for most businesses that are trying to get into content is that there are two things. One is there is this assumption that content is merely a replacement for the collateral or other marketing content that we've created forever and ever. In other words, instead of a catalog, we'll produce a white paper. Instead of this website, we'll produce a blog. Instead of this brochure, we'll create this thought leadership article, and we'll look at it the same way, which of course is flawed, because in most cases that white paper, that thought leadership article, that wonderful, entertaining, inspiring piece is harder to create than a catalog. It is more difficult, it is more expensive, it takes more time. And so what we do is we tend to mitigate that time and effort with quantity.
Yes.
And so we say, let's diversify as much as we can. So we'll create tons of blog posts and we'll create tons of stuff. And that'll help us, sort of overcome that which is really been in our habit for so long, which is to create more catalogs, more white papers, more collateral material. And that's where a lot of businesses are in these days, are sort of in this hamster wheel of creating more and more and more and more content that is commoditized and doesn't really have a distinct point of view and doesn't really spend the time to develop in-depth quality, because they're scared to take the risk of really reducing the amount of quantity that they're creating, and really focus on developing something remarkable. And that's hard, and it's a difficult thing, and it's a cultural change for most businesses. The second thing that is really challenging is that the business focuses on, and it comes out of that first, is that they focus on the content, not the audience. And quite frankly, the ROI will never be in the content. The ROI has never been in marketing, has never been in the content. It is always on what is the impact of that content. And so when we think about content marketing, its purpose is to engage and build an audience that wants to hear from us. Thus, what we have to measure is our ability to convert an audience. That doesn't mean convert them into a lead per se. It means we have to convert them into a subscribed audience that wants to hear from us first, and then start to assemble attributes against them called lead, qualified lead, opportunity, customer, etc. That's the real key. Is we can start looking at the aggregation of an audience as our main success metric, that feeds the ability for us to then reduce the amount of content we're creating and focus on the quality.
And are you seeing a lot of like checklist marketing right now?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. I mean, I know you knew the answer to that question before you even asked it, but yes, that's exactly what technology has wrought in so many businesses these days is that exact what you just called a checklist marketing, which is, hey, we need to do the term du jour is, do more with less.
Yeah.
And so as doing more with less expresses itself in technology, marketing automation, CRM systems, CMS systems, all of that stuff. It's like, yep, I did it. I published the thing and I get bonused if I produce 4 white papers this year. And so 1 per quarter, and I'm on track for my bonus because I produced 4. And, quite frankly, they all 4 sucked, but I produced 4. And so I met my my quota. And so I get my bonus.
And that's it, because if you hear a lot of like the YouTube marketing experts or even some of the podcasts, the focus tends to be much more on quantity than quality. No one really talks about how to build great, interesting, compelling content. It's more like just get the listicle out, go to BuzzSumo, rename it to something that has to do with you. Make it longer so you get better SEO. And do you see that working?
I do, in the sense that if you call working building vanity metrics, right? And so, there's a wonderful quote by the guy Eli Goldratt, who is a physicist and kind of a business, strategy guru. And he says, if you measure, tell me how you measure me, and I will tell you how I will behave. And if you measure me in an illogical way, don't complain about illogical behavior. And I love that quote because it's exactly where we are with content, because the way that we measure marketers these days as businesses is on those vanity metrics. Because it quite frankly, everybody goes, well, that's the only way I can measure it.
Yeah.
Based on how many people consumed it, how much organic traffic did I get, how many visits did I get, how many clicks, how many shares. None of those things matter in the scheme of life. What matters is what happened next, right? What did we do? What did we actually accomplish other than get someone to consume a piece of content? Just because we got a visitor to the website to look at that long blog that we got to rank organically, if it attracts the wrong people, if it attracts people who are searching for a particular term, but our product or service or our content doesn't, compel them to ask more about that product or service, it doesn't matter if we're on the front page of Google. It just doesn't. And so ultimately, I'd much rather have 1,000 people subscribe to what I want to say than 100,000 people visit my website and do nothing. Right? That's a much more difficult, challenging thing to wrestle with as a marketing team, because it really means that, we have to take the great responsibility to provide that level of value. However, I'll kind of reverse the quote. It's like, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, if we take the great responsibility, then we can get the bigger power.
But you've got the CMOs with an 18-month runway, typically, right? They have to have attribution.
That's right.
How do they convince the CEO to do this?
So the key is that, and it goes back to what we talked about at the top of the show, which is to start to look at your content program much more than just a replacement for direct marketing. Yeah. And what that means is that we have to provide for value that is outside of just a lead or just a qualified lead. And there's where the value can be achieved in a much shorter time frame. Now, it's not the end-all, be-all of the value. Your ultimate goal may be to provide more leads or more qualified leads or more customers or more revenue into the pipeline. That is a classic marketing goal, of course. So if we create content, however, And a great example of this is I'll ask a CEO of a company and I'll say, tell me about your marketing database. And they'll say, well, we have 25,000, in our email list. Great. Is that 25,000 emails like Mickey Mouse at gmail.com? Or, yes, of course. Yes, some of that is. Great. Well, you've created the quantity, but you don't have quality, right? You've created a 90% of those people, and that's being generous, by the way, 90% of those 25,000 people in that email database are never going to buy from you. And that's okay. That's all right, because they can provide value in other ways. One of the ways that they might provide that value is that we take that database, and because they're people who want to hear from us, let's assume that for the moment, that they're not just scraped at a trade show or something like that. These are people who actually subscribe to our content and want to hear it. Well, let's poll and survey them to find out, what media that they're reading or consuming, so that we make our paid media effort better or more efficient. Or let's actually use the data that we're getting from a first-party, data collection, and let's use that to do retargeting for them across their buyer's journey, so that we're actually putting targeted ads out in front of them, so that they're clicking on those better. The gap between what we would normally spend and the gap between what we spend using the audience as an asset, that's value that we can show. Let's start to value people that we get into our subscription database by looking at whether they're targeted, whether they're engaged, whether they're actually ever going to be a lead for us, and start to value them accordingly. And we can actually start to monetize the value of the audience we're building. There was a wonderful study that was actually just done, which they didn't actually take steps 2, 3, and 4. But the first step of it is great. It was done by LinkedIn and Salesforce. And what they found is that the average B2B company spends anywhere between $100 to $150 each to add an email to their marketing database. Now, if you think about that for a second, that's all in cost. That's employee cost. That's a media cost. That's basically the cost of putting a single entrant email into your marketing database. That means if you multiply your current email marketing database by $100 or $150, depending on your industry, that's the value of an asset that you have. Yeah. How much more valuable would it be if those people were people who wanted to hear from you, not just scraped, or people who actually engaged with what you had to say? And if we start looking at that audience as an asset, now we can start to show measurement from subscriber number one.
And, inbound was really necessary, certainly 5 years ago, before we had all this data that we have today on our total addressable market. Do you see a shift now where it may make more economic sense to go outbound?
Well, here's what I'll say to that. I'd say, first of all, going back to your comment about the checklist marketing, it is criminal to me how many marketers these days don't know their TAM. They don't know their total addressable market. It's the first thing I ask when I go into a business that's a new business. I'll say, "Tell me about your TAM," and they'll say, "I don't even know what that means." and every marketer should know that number by heart. Yeah. And then they should also know, by the way, what the total addressable audience is in that market, especially in B2B. They need to know what their total, because if you're targeting companies that will buy your software or, your product once, well, how many people in there are going to change jobs or move around? And if there's 2 or 3 or 5 people that are personas within that business, that means if your total addressable market is, 100,000, well, that means, your average total addressable audience is 500,000. So anyway, knowing those numbers is important. The second thing to your question is really when we look at how we look at outbound versus inbound. If we're building something like a content marketing platform, call it a thought leadership program or a webinar program or a resource center or whatever it is we actually create, ultimately, if we're building that as a valuable piece of our business strategy, it too deserves to be promoted and marketed and sold. Yeah. In other words, our sales guys should be promoting the blog. We should have a small marketing budget to advertise for people, to come visit the blog. It should be part of an outbound marketing and sales effort to promote not just our products and services, but our position in thought leadership and content and ideas that we're putting into the marketplace. And so, I absolutely believe that outbound and inbound still have a huge place to play in what we're doing, as a business.
And what is the journey you take a client through? You know, give me an idea of what that engagement looks like.
Sure. Basically, there ends up typically being two. One is where I will literally go in with a client and just sit, for a day, and or 2 days or 3 days, depending on the client. And I just act as a part of their team, right? They're trying to figure out some thorny problem as it pertains to content marketing, content strategy, digital marketing, and I just sit as a member of their team and help them create that roadmap or that plan or solve that thorny problem. The second, which is a more in-depth, if you will, consulting engagement, is where I'm helping an organization stand up an operation for the first time. I should say re-stand up an organization that has, is flailing and or has problems. And in that case, the thing that I want to come in and look at is, first of all, what is it we're solving for, right? So the first part of my engagement, we'll really sit with the team and start to think, what are our business goals? Not just the vanity metrics, but what is it we're really trying to solve for? What is the experience for the customer we're trying to create that we're trying to solve for? Once we've established that, everything else falls by the wayside. It is, by the way, the one biggest flaw in most content marketing strategies is that when we set up our blog or we set up our resource center, we're trying to have it do everything. Yeah. We want it to build leads. We want it to solve the customer service issue. We want it to give it a how-to. We want to give it and that's where it starts to diffuse into, trying to be everything to everybody, and it's nothing to no one. And so building the focus and the purpose of what it is we're trying to solve for. Once we have that, everything else falls away, and we start looking at, great, what is the story and the value we're trying to tell? What is it, what does our editorial strategy look like? What does our measurement strategy look like? What does our audience building strategy look like? And how do we value that audience over time? Building that part of the strategy. And then lastly, what are our gaps in getting there? So now we've built a vision and a purpose. Now, how do we actually roadmap to get there? And that's where we start looking at the gaps. And do we have the right talent? Do we need to engage, external or other internal resources? Do we have what's the budget that we're going to need to do this? What's the technology we're going to need to facilitate this? And ultimately, what's the timeline of value that we will create versus the expense that we're going to take to get there? If it sounds a little bit like developing a product-oriented methodology, it's because it is. It's very much how do we develop the product of content in our business and then create a foundational strategy for how it can operate over time. And that, that can take, depending on the size of the business, anywhere between, a week to 4 weeks to sort of sort out with everybody.
And, over the last 5 years, what have you seen become more and more effective versus less and less effective from a what kind of content standpoint? It's really, one of my pet peeves is to see some of these companies that will say the best time to blog is on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Right? Yep. Of course it is, until you say that the best time to blog is Tuesdays at 10 a.m. And then, of course, it's instantly not anymore because everybody starts blogging at Tuesday at 10 a.m. Yeah. So I'll say this, certainly best practices, I always say let's start with best practices. Let's not finish with best practices. And so what I have seen over the last 5 years, of course, video has become, and the transformation of the web into a video-driven platform is, everybody can see that, right? That is starting to happen from live video to, transforming our content into video to helper and explainer videos. That has really been a seismic shift, I would say, in the way that we look at the experiences we're creating for customers. Audio as well. Podcasting has been an extremely, hot topic of late, and a growing and burgeoning content marketing platform for many businesses. It's a very intimate and very media-rich way to interact with customers. And honestly, looking at, I think, transforming the sort of classic old website, our corporate brochureware website,
into something that is much more of a media operation than it is sort of a extended yellow page listing, is something as a trend I've been seeing with companies that really get it. In other words, asking ourselves, do we really need the website that says about us, executive bios, here's the awards we've won, here's the press releases, here's that? Maybe the answer to that is yes, but maybe that's simply something that we can deprecate down to a much lower level, because people will find that, and instead elevating up, who we are as a company, right? What do we stand for? What do we say? What do we have to say to the world? And using the web for what it's really built for, which is a multimedia platform to tell a story.
And what do you see as emerging agencies? Because, I see, maybe this is just my opinion, obviously the technology-oriented agency could really start up, because now you have all of this information about people. Then you have things like persona-based agencies that could be like, if you're selling to, software developers on AWS, or you might have CEOs and SMB companies that somebody owns that kind of persona, and working with those influencers, that could help kind of expand your content strategy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the agency world is like every other industry that we see out there. It's getting disrupted too, and I mean, you look at the 5 biggest agencies in the world right now, and they're not called Ogilvy or McCann or Y&R. They're called Deloitte and Accenture, and that's a real trend that's happening, where the large consulting firms are starting to come in and disrupt what it is we think of when we think of agencies doing everything from paid media, owned media, to creative services, et cetera, technology as a core foundation of that. But then if you look on the other side of the spectrum, you've got publishing companies that are starting to the ones that really understand media and audiences are starting to compete with agencies as well. You've got T Brand Studios, which is a part, of course, of the New York Times. Their T Brand Studios is a full-on agency now. They do ad campaigns, they do owned media, they do content, they do audience development, they do all kinds of strategic services that we would normally associate with an agency for a brand. And quite frankly, are competing with many of the classic web and digital agencies that are out there. And all of the publishing companies now have some level of this, whether it's Revolution Studios from CNN, 23 from Condé Nast, there's so many of these things that are happening, as well as the sort of growth of the gig economy and freelancers that are coming in and really disrupting agencies, where they sit. The agencies that I see are really getting it are the ones that are adapting into this and starting to focus on exactly the things you just talked about, who are really looking at the strategic alignment of how do I build an audience through persona development, through technology, through the use of first-party data, and become and stretch out, not just handle one strata of the buyer's journey, but to help them really facilitate an audience and a customer base that, really encompasses the entirety of the customer journey.
And for the people that are listening to this and want to learn more about you and your company and what you're doing, where should they go?
Well, that's just incredibly sweet of you to bring up, Brian. So if you want to learn about the sort of business side of what I do, contentadvisory.net is the website. That's where I've got all of the things that I do from a consulting perspective. And then if you're just interested in the books or anything like that, robertrose.net. Is the place to learn a little bit more about me. I chose .net for both of them because somebody told me once that the .net is the dad jeans of domains. So I decided that I couldn't get .com for Robert Rose, so I decided to default everything to the .net domain.
Yeah, at least it's not IO.
So I am the dad. Something. I am the dad jeans.
Hey, Robert's a really fun guy, really easygoing, easy to talk to, and very informative. I hope you enjoyed that. What I did want to share with you is I'm using my Start the Conversation, Get the Meeting course in the demand gen side, as well as the sales development side. So if you're running sales, I've got that for you. It's a great way for you to get cold, outbound contacts and do it authentically and naturally instead of the pitching and the spamming. And if you're on the demand gen marketing side, if you want a great way to build up connections and content and that network for your sales team and to see if these people are qualified and where they are in their journey and their level of interest, I can show you how to do that as well. So you can do it self-paced. I have office hours twice a month, and there's already 5 months of office hours in there. So there's about 10 hours of great examples of how people are using it and leveraging it. And if you'd like me to customize it, I can customize it to your particular profile and market space. Let me know about that. And if you're looking to hire sales development reps, and I've got a sales development rep course that you could put them through as a way of getting them started so that you don't have to do all the training. Let them take a couple weeks off before they start at the company, and they can go and learn how to do the job. And it's a full year long, kind of guide them through that first year of being in sales development, either on the marketing side or on the demand gen side. I hope you connect with me on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn, and subscribe over at b2brevenue.com. Get your free ebook. Really appreciate you listening. Please tell one person this week about the show. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for listening.